National Chief, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today, and I guess I can still call you National Chief. I noticed in your social media reports last evening there was a sense of relief, even vindication. Were you worried that your opponents might have prevailed yesterday?
I really came into this knowing that I was telling the truth and that we had to get to the bottom of some of the corruption issues and financial irregularities at AFN. And I didn't think so much about how the vote would go. I just knew that I had a purpose and I had a job to do, and that's what I focused on.
Awesome. The one thing that I'm not clear on, and I've covered the AFN for a long time, and I think would be helpful for our viewers to hear your explanation for the issue of the Confederacy of Nations. What's the dispute all about?
The Confederacy has been defunct for a number of years. The last time they met was, I believe, in 2013 or 14. And it is the oversight body. It's the actual body that is supposed to oversee the AFN executive in between the assemblies. And because we haven't had that oversight, I believe that that's a direct result of what has happened. Because lack of oversight means that people can become errant. They can become improper in their decisions. And of course, the decision to purportedly suspend me was unlawful. And if the Confederacy of Nations had been in place, we might be in a different place right now than we find ourselves at this AGA, in a much healthier and better place.
I remember when Matthew Kuhnkan was elected in 2000, it was unexpected, and his executive were mostly Phil Fontaine loyalists, his predecessor. I'm seeing some parallels to your situation. Am I wrong, or are you dealing with much the same thing that Matthew did?
There's only one executive member who is a real Perry Bellegarde loyalist. I think everybody knows who that is. The other executive are executive that I worked with when I was a regional chief in Ontario. I know them, they know me, and I believe that the atmosphere of toxicity at the AFN really begun to infiltrate many things. My own staff were impacted by that. The executive was impacted by that. But it's really about the colonial structure, Paul. You know, it's really about this thing that encases us. It's not a personal thing. When you are encased in a colonial patriarchal structure, then you can be guaranteed toxicity. You can be guaranteed imbalance. You can be guaranteed these kinds of things that have happened at the AFN. So we need to change that structure. We need a new structure, and we need to move people into that structure so that they can thrive and be in a healthy environment.
It sounds like this goes far beyond the AFN. The AFN is just maybe more visible than a lot of institutions. Is that a fair conclusion to draw from what you just said?
Yeah, it's about colonialism. It's about patriarchy. It's about the fact that, you know, our inherent and treaty rights and our inherent laws, our natural laws, our connection to the Creator and those natural laws has been interfered with and impacted by colonialism. So it's a much bigger issue for sure.
Okay. Here's a term you may not have heard recently, but I remember when Phil Fontaine and even Perry Bellegarde were accused of creating a kind of super band office where the AFN controlled the money, brought it in, and then the First Nations would be upset. And some of their political opponents said they were too close to the federal government because you have to please the colonial master in order to have the funding levels rise. So are you in a situation now where you feel like your call for transparency and accountability may make the federal government uncomfortable and the AFN may find it harder to access funding?
There's an old saying, you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? And that means we have to have an arm's length relationship with any government, whether they're Liberal, PC, NDP, whatever the party is. We have to have that space. We can't be enmeshed with anybody. And so if the governments decide to be punishing about that, then that says more about them than it says about us. And I think that's really important to talk about, is the use of public funds by federal governments, provincial governments, to punish First Nations or to co-opt them. That's a bigger issue. And it's not just an AFN issue.
Quite so. Some of the people we talked to over the last year or two tell us that when Guerin came down from the Supreme Court, finding that there was a fiduciary relationship, that the feds decided the strategy was to back away from oversight in order to diminish their fiduciary responsibility. So now we have a situation where some of your supporters are saying the government knew about these contracts, that CERNAC, ISC, certain liberal-connected companies have benefited up till now, and the government knew it, but they didn't do anything. Is that an issue you've raised with the ministers?
I have not raised that issue yet, but I'm really glad that you're looking into that, because I believe that journalism and journalists have to dig further on those issues. I don't have any information at this point, but I think that, through investigative journalism, maybe that's where we start to find these issues.
We're starting to get some of the contracts, not all. I was hoping that there was an easily accessible list. Does such a list exist? Are you prepared to release it at the right time?
I can only release information to chiefs.
To chiefs?
Yeah, that's my obligation. My obligation is to release information to chiefs, and that's what I've been doing since this whole thing started. And that's what one of the chiefs in the meeting talked about. He was like, I've received 15 emails from you, and previous to that, not many. So I have an obligation to tell the chiefs the truth. And they are actually taking action. When they voted to not uphold the purported suspension, that was them saying, okay, we're going to take control of this situation. So you're going to see chiefs more active. You're going to see chiefs directing this organization. You will see less of the tail wagging the dog, as one chief put it earlier. You're going to see an organization empowered by chiefs.
Now, some of the media leaks that started all this seek to portray you as a little bit flaky. I'm sorry for using that term, but I've seen the rewilding term used in a couple of media reports, and I want to give you a chance to clear that up and try to explain what you were attempting to do with your staff.
Decolonization is an important process. We're in a colonial construct, and that was my discussion, was around decolonizing ourselves within the office, and then looking at decolonization as a larger issue for First Nations. So to me, that's an actual, if you research decolonization, you'll find all kinds of educational, PhD papers, academia. You will find that this is an actual, intellectual and real issue that is facing First Nations. And so the portrayal of decolonization as something that is flaky is really, it's not true.
I remember speaking to a noted elder, Jake Thomas at Six Nations, who said it took us 500 years to get this messed up. It may take us 500 to get straightened out.
That's right.
I heard you telling the chiefs that they represent sovereign nations, and that raises another issue that some of your predecessors, Matthew Kunkam especially, talked about revitalization of Indigenous nations. But I do the math, and there's 600 plus First Nations, and there's maybe 60 Indigenous nations. And right away you can go, boy, that means 500 odd chiefs are not going to be chiefs anymore. Is that something you're going to pursue, the idea of I know it's a troublesome question, but
yeah, it's a difficult question to answer in 8 or 9 minutes, let alone 1 minute of that 8 or 9 minutes. The thing about nations is that, we drove across Canada to get here, my staff and I, and we drove for days, hours and hours and hours. And all of that land that we drove through is First Nation land. It's land that was given to us by the Creator. And prior to contact, we were nations. You know, and as a result of being nations, we made those treaties. Only nations can make treaties. And so how do we, within the colonial construct, begin to look at the organization of ourselves on those nation bases, or what we like to call in my office international, because it's like all of these nations across Canada. I have 2 years left in my mandate, so I'm one piece of a bigger puzzle piece. Like, I'm just like one little dot on a big puzzle piece that has to be put together and as you said, what Matthew said, you know, reconstituting and revitalizing. So I have 2 years to do my part. But this is a big, long story. First Nations are a long story that go back to time immemorial and will go forward thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So these 2 years that I have, I'm going to do everything I can to be a part of that solution of decolonizing ourselves, creating our own institutions based upon our culture, our traditions, our languages. I'm going to do my part. But not one national chief will solve the thousands of years that have predated this today, and will not certainly solve the thousands of years to come. But we can each do our part, and that's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Finally, I don't think I've ever heard the word love used so much in political discourse as I heard yesterday. Is this a sign of a female national chief? We're going to go for a totally different approach?
Love in the colonial construct is always talked about from the romantic perspective. But real love is family. It's friends. It's a feeling and an emotion and a spiritual kind of energy that wants the best for you. I want the best for you. I want you to be lifted up. That's the love that we're talking about. And it's long overdue that the ideas around a deep and abiding love and care for our people came to the forefront. Because then we're not making political decisions of our mind, but we're thinking about our children, our grandchildren, the 7 generations ahead, the people around us, and how we are moving forward to give those people a better life, to help them, to lift them up.